Let's talk about the politics now of reforming DAFs. I have to say, when I write a column on foundation payouts, I'll get two or three kind of unpleasant letters. If I
Mhm.
talk about foundation expenses or foundations and politics, I'll get a couple of letters. I write something about DAFs, and there'll be 15 or 20 letters. How dare you? Um, and what there's several relationships that I don't quite understand. First, why the community foundations and the nonprofit DAF sponsors seem to be willing to carry so much freight for the for-profit sponsors. And the second is, why do the two big, well, I guess three or four of the biggest trade associations in the nonprofit area, Council, Philanthropy, Roundtable, a few others, why are they so unwilling to take a stand, a strong stand on DAFs? I mean, those two questions. I understand there's Silicon Valley Community Foundation that gets what $2 billion in DAF money a year or something like. It's huge.
Well, only 5% of the grants that they make come from their general fund. 95% of the money comes from donor advised funds,
Wow.
which to me is it's right on their 990. And to me, that's like saying Wells Fargo makes all these grants. Oh yeah, 95% of them are actually written by checking account customers, but we're going to take credit for the whole amount. Uh, well, the first thing is I think that to me, like for example, the agribusiness has been very smart about holding up the image of the family farm. And so when people think about farming, they think about mom and pop with a pitchfork and two pigs, and instead, it's literally hundreds of thousands of acres under machine-based cultivation, right? With undocumented people from Mexico picking strawberries, and so I think that so I think we need to do a better job of saying we're trying to regulate big business. And by doing so, we intend to protect family farms. So I think that's the thing. And almost, I mean, a million people say things to me like, well, I mean, I have a friend who has a donor advice fund and she does really great stuff with it. I go, that's fabulous. She's a family farm, right? We're talking about let's say farms that start with 100,000 acres and saying something has to be done about pesticide exposure to farm workers, right? So those are such entirely, but we have not made that differentiation very clearly among the advocates. And I also think that we are just bombarded right now with fintech, the fintech in kind of takeover of the DAF space or coming takeover in the DAF space, and by DAF messaging, which is maybe best exemplified notoriously by GoFundMe, now selling gift cards. So like for Christmas, Craig, I could give you a $50 gift card to a nonprofit. And why don't I just give that gift card to the nonprofit? That way, first of all, as you probably know, the gift card industry is largely fueled by people never using gift cards. Uh,
Right.
and so in this sense, the nonprofit not only gets tax deduction, the non, no, and GoFundMe gets to keep the money in effect, right? Because the gift card hasn't been used. So I think that we're besieged by people saying, and Fidelity. When I met with some people from Fidelity a few years ago, they were saying their fastest growing area of business is is endowed, not technically endowed, but sort of investment funds. So you put your donor advised fund money into, let's say, an environmental fund. It's kept in perpetuity, and then the Fidelity decides what environmental causes uh, that the proceeds get used for, or that the assets are invested in. So they can invest it in Tesla, for example, and they get to keep management of the funds. Tesla gets the money, and you got the tax deduction. So I think we're just besieged by being people telling us it's more effective to put it into a donor advised fund or a card than it is to give to a nonprofit. So,
So what do we need to do to get more people in the nonprofit area or in general to start putting pressure for change on DAFs, even if just simple incremental changes like you were talking about? What's possible? Is there a realistic strategy for doing so?
when I was at Cal Nonprofits, I would say DAF reform is the single most emotional issue for nonprofits. So, we could talk about a lot of important issues that are really important to nonprofits, but the one that would get people's blood boiling and they would be just like shaking with rage would be donor advised funds. And yet but on the other hand, two examples from our meeting with legislators. One, we had a meeting with a legislator in his district and on the issue of donor advised funds. And one of the people in that meeting was from a large nonprofit and well-respected nonprofit in his district and said, I'm here under plausible deniability. The community foundation cannot hear that I even came to this meeting, right? And so there's enormous amount of fear about speaking out. This is why I wish that I think we hope and that the nonprofit associations, right, the associations of mental health providers and et cetera, would be more willing to speak out on this because we know their members care deeply about it. I was at the Association of Museums, California Museums, right? And museums care a lot about this. This is a huge, crazy issue for them, is people putting money in DAFs and not because they rely a lot on large donors, right? And having those donors do that is, but nonetheless, again, that associations just don't want to speak out. And I have to say, kind of on the national scale, I ask Council on Foundations and other people, they're all reliant on foundation money, and they're all in many ways kind of captured by foundation and by foundation influence. And I don't see that changing. And so they don't want to say anything. And I do think that the foundation community has, kind of built this beltway around it of consultants and researchers and lobbyists that just like the other beltway,
Yeah.
protects them. So they're so protected. The sort of the philanthropic support infrastructure has just overwhelmed everything. It's just shocking. But
So is there any hope?
so one more thing about this. So I think that the community foundations a long time ago had this idea, like we are having our lunches are being eaten by the commercial funds, right? We need to explain to everybody that we're different. We're not like them. Go ahead and regulate them, but we're different, okay? We're authentic. We're community-based, et cetera, et cetera. And then at some point, they changed tactics. And that tactic was to say, like, we are like Fidelity. We are like them because you know what? They're going to pay all the lobbying bills.
Yeah.
Wow.
As
They're
if the family farmer allied themselves with Big Ag.
That's right, because
Yeah.
they're going to protect us. And if you see the amount that Fidelity in particular has given to national nonprofit and philanthropic infrastructure organizations, it's really shocking. Okay, and so the fact is that you're beheld to nonprofits and to the commercial funds, and the community foundations are saying, cool, we don't have to do anything. We just have to show up at the hearing. With Fidelity doesn't even show up. They just have sent us our talking points ahead of time, and they've paid the $50 million in lobbying fees to do this. So to me, that's been a huge change in the politics of it. And what I do think is right now they are all somewhat under threat of the fintech industry, and I just don't know where that's going to go.
So why don't private foundations, though, kind of rise up in anger? The way it's going, DAFs are going to completely erode that sector. 20 years from now, people won't even think about creating private foundations, or very few will. They'll just give to DAFs. You get a higher deduction. You have no payout requirement. There's no transparency. You don't even have to give an address where people can send requests. There's no access all of those were things that were central to the reform of the foundation sector in the late 1960s. Why doesn't Ford and Rockefeller stand up and say, we think foundations are good, and as a result, we're opposed to the growth of DAFs?
I think very few foundations are interested in protecting foundations. I think they're interested in protecting their foundation. I don't think that they're really interested in the sector. Yeah, I don't think so. I recently talked to a couple of young people of color with inherited wealth. And they were talking about, and both of them said something along the lines of, that they had both been told that, as children, someday when you grow up, maybe you can be on the board of our family foundation, right? And these are both international wealth. And they discovered as adults that there was no family foundation. There was a family DAF.
Yeah.
And, and there's a committee, an informal committee that made the DAF decisions. And I believe that that's the way it's going to go. I mean, why would you if you can do that? Or, if you're really at the high end, the tax deduction doesn't matter to you because you really aren't paying personal income taxes anyway.
Right.
And so, why not use an LLC or something like that? And do I think that there's hope? I would say not in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's a really great thing you just made, Craig. That needs to be an emoji.
Okay, we've kept you longer than we promised. Do you have any final words to say? I mean, especially after saying all hope is lost. Whoops. Sorry about that.
We still have to keep at it.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you still have to keep at it, like the Irish monks copying books, maybe, literacy is not going to come back in our lifetimes, but we still have to do it. And the one other thing, so you asked all these questions about the tax code and civil society ahead of time. So I had to think about that stuff for a few minutes.
Well, let's get that in if you
make one comment about that. Okay. Yeah. I think that one way that we don't think about the nonprofit community that we should is that it's the operationalization of the First Amendment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to assemble peaceably, freedom to petition the government, right? These ideas are all made real through the nonprofit sector. And I think that that we're neglecting understanding nonprofits that way, rather than as simple charity, for example, simple helping the poor, or as sort of, changing societal norms or something like that. Those things are done incrementally.
So does philanthropy and charity need the tax code to do that, though? Subsidization, no. Incentivization. I mean, we would have civil society without the tax code.
I mean, it was only in 1998 that Japan created a means for people to be legal nonprofit organizations. And so, and right now there are only 11,000 nonprofits in Japan, registered nonprofits. It's still quite difficult. And even not all of those get tax deduction. Very few of them do. For a small percentage get tax deduction. So what you see, I mean, in the United States, about 70% of all non-incorporated nonprofits are all volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we should celebrate that, and I think those are the organizations that we would keep. Right?
Japan, I don't know anything about it, but I assume Japan had civil society prior to 1998. We're hearing about now the attack.
It was almost entirely all volunteer organizations.
Yeah. No, as a matter of fact, my very first trip to Japan was in 1992 with Bob Bothwell, of all people. And we spent 3 weeks meeting these local community groups all over Japan. And it was inspiring.
It is inspiring.
If you talked about tax deductions to them, they'd look at you like, huh? No, we're doing this to make our community better, to take care of citizens here who need help. We spent one day with a group that took care of people in wheelchairs, basically. And at the time, as you know, wheelchairs are complicated in Japan. A lot of store owners didn't want people in wheelchairs rolling around. And it was fascinating. And I actually came away from that thinking we might be better off if we got rid of the tax deduction. I mean, I think big philanthropy and maybe the worst of the big nonprofits would disappear then.
Well, I think the big nonprofits are all government funded.
Yeah.
All right. So I do think if we got rid of the tax deduction, we would keep the all volunteer organizations, 70% of the organizations, and we keep the big health and human services nonprofits because those are all government money.
You're right. Yep.
Okay. Well, we would lose the mid-level locally based organizations, and I think those are really important organizations.
Okay.
And I also do think the importance of being able to have a clear way to say we're the good guys is also important. I mean, I mean, similarly in the United States, nobody at Alcoholics Anonymous, they're similar to the folks in Japan you talked about. They don't need a tax deduction for the dollar that they put down, right? That's like what, you know, but it's important that AA be a nonprofit organization, I think, in terms of sort of its stance in the world.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Which was your, I mean, your original point, Jan, was though that the goodness associated with the word nonprofit or tax deductible was being sort of misused, abused,
It is
misdeployed. You're calling for that to stop, I guess.
But every word is misused.
Yeah.
I mean, Christian is an example of a word that's misused a lot, but that doesn't mean that Christians should stop calling themselves Christian.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
I
All
just
right.
want, I love the giving review. You guys do a great job and you keep at it and and I love the fact that some things are really short and other things are really long.
Thank you to you. And please give my very best to John. We've known each other for a long, long time.
It's great.
You're doing such terrific work. Thank you.